Dutch Schultz, the beer baron of the Bronx, who made millions during Prohibition, ruled Harlem's numbers racket and terrorized rivals with brutal violence, all while believing he was untouchable. But Schultz's greed and paranoia would make him one of the most reckless mobsters of his era. How did a Bronx street punk rise to control a criminal empire worth millions, only to end up betrayed and executed by the very mafia he thought he controlled? To understand, we have to go back to the beginning, to the story of a gangster who became too wild for even the mob to handle. This is the rise and fall of Dutch Schultz, the mad gangster who thought he was bigger than the mafia. Subscribe now and let's dive in. Arthur Fliegenheimer was born in 1902 in the Bronx, New York. The son of German-Jewish immigrants, Arthur grew up in poverty, surrounded by tenements, sweatshops, and gangs. His father abandoned the family when Arthur was just 14, leaving his mother to raise him alone. This early betrayal planted the seeds of resentment and toughness in young Arthur. He dropped out of school, turned to petty theft, and quickly found himself in and out of reform school. By the 1920s, the United States had entered the Prohibition era. Alcohol was banned, but the demand never went away. To ambitious street thugs, it was an opportunity like no other. Arthur reinvented himself. He ditched his birth name and adopted a sharper, more intimidating alias, Dutch Schultz. The nickname came from a neighborhood gangster, and Schultz wore it like armor. He wasn't going to be just another Bronx kid scraping by. He wanted power, he wanted money, and he was willing to spill blood to get it. Dutch Schultz began his rise in the world of bootlegging. He joined up with a Bronx crew running beer into speakeasies, shaking down saloon owners, and hijacking trucks. Schultz quickly earned a reputation for brutality. Unlike other mobsters who tried to run their operations with some finesse, Schultz was hands-on. He personally beat rivals, tortured enemies, and executed disloyal workers. If a bar owner refused to buy his beer, Schultz's men would smash the place up, or worse. Within a few years, Schultz controlled hundreds of speakeasies across the Bronx and Manhattan. He became so dominant in the illegal beer trade that newspapers began calling him the beer baron of the Bronx. His fortune grew into the millions, but Schultz wasn't just violent, he was cunning. He kept his operations decentralized, moving product through shell companies and bribed police officers. His men carried sawed-off shotguns, and his enemies often turned up in rivers. Still, Dutch Schultz wasn't content with bootlegging. He wanted more. By the early 1930s, Schultz saw an even bigger opportunity: Harlem's booming numbers racket. This was essentially an underground lottery, wildly popular in black neighborhoods, generating millions every year. The racket was controlled by black gangsters like Madame Stephanie Saint, Claire and her enforcer, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. But Schultz, ruthless and ambitious, decided he wanted in. He unleashed a wave of terror. Schultz's men kidnapped numbers runners, beat them senseless, and forced them to work for him. Businesses that refused were firebombed. Street organizers who resisted were murdered. Madame St. Clair fought back, even writing letters to newspapers accusing police of being on Schultz's payroll. But over time, Schultz's sheer violence overwhelmed Harlem's independent operators. By the mid-1930s, Schultz dominated the numbers racket, raking in staggering profits. But every dollar he made and every rival he crushed only fed his paranoia. Schultz became convinced that everyone was out to betray him. Success brought attention, and attention brought enemies. One of Schultz's biggest problems was prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey. Dewey made it his personal mission to take down mobsters who had grown rich during Prohibition. Schultz was at the top of his list. In 1933, Schultz was indicted on tax evasion charges. He beat the rap once, but Dewey was relentless. Schultz was eventually convicted and faced serious prison time. Here's where his paranoia kicked into overdrive. Schultz became obsessed with killing Thomas Dewey. He ranted about it constantly, demanding his men assassinate the prosecutor before he could lock him away. But this was a step too far, even for the Mafia. By now, Schultz was supposed to be working under the Mafia Commission, the governing body of organized crime led by bosses like Lucky Luciano and Frank Costello. But Schultz's reckless plan to murder Dewey threatened to bring down heat on all of them. At a secret meeting, the commission voted. Dutch Schultz had become a liability. The sentence was death. On the night of October 23, 1935, Schultz and his men were dining at the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey. He had no idea that his executioners were already on the way. A team of Murder, Inc. hitmen entered the restaurant. They pulled out their guns and opened fire. Bullets tore through Schultz and his associates. The beer baron of the Bronx collapsed onto the floor, bleeding heavily. But here's the shocking part. He didn't die immediately. Schultz was rushed to the hospital, clinging to life. For 22 hours, he drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering incoherently. His so-called deathbed ramblings were recorded by police stenographers, pages of bizarre, disjointed phrases that gave a haunting glimpse into his fractured mind. Finally, Dutch Schultz died on October 24, 1935. He was just 33 years old. Conclusion: the mad gangster who couldn't last. Dutch Schultz's empire didn't outlive him. His bootlegging operations crumbled after the repeal of Prohibition. His Harlem rackets were taken over by other mobsters. His fortune disappeared into the hands of rivals and the government. In the end, Schultz left behind no dynasty, no legacy of respect, and no family empire. Instead, he became a cautionary tale, the gangster who was too wild, too paranoid, and too dangerous for even the mafia to tolerate. Dutch Schultz thought he was untouchable. But in the world of organized crime, no one truly is. What do you think? Was Dutch Schultz simply ahead of his time, or was he doomed from the start by his own violence and paranoia? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into mafia history. Up next, we'll be covering another gangster who rose fast but fell harder. Stay tuned.